Polygamy in its purest form, as I talked about, it's about community, it's about building family, and also it's about economic stability. But if you don't even agree with any of that, what do you have to replace it with? Like, if you don't want to have this conversation, what conversation do you have? Monogamy, checking your man's phone, trying to control a man? The gender war conversation, the relationship, the typical monogamous relationship conversation in the West, I'm not interested in it. I'm not interested in it because I know it doesn't work.
Okay, so I want to start with just a baseline for historical human behavior, at least for the West. So marriage in ancient Rome was strictly a monogamous institution. So this is Wikipedia. It's not the most reliable resource, but it'll function in at least establishing that for the long-lasting Rome Empire, even with their sexual deviations, they still believed in a relatively monogamous society, okay? So the question becomes, why would Rome be so invested in having a monogamous or a society that was not polyamorous? So this is a article covering the argument that was made to the Canadian courts, and we could read through the article, but I think what's most important is I want to scroll down so you guys can see this particular part, and I want to read this for you. Which traced the history of marriage back to ancient Greece and Rome, where he said Western cultures have consistently promoted monogamy and denounced polygamy for 2,500 years. He said that ancient Greek and Roman philosophers described monogamous marriage as necessary, natural and necessary to foster mutual love, respect, and companionship among husband and wives. In contrast, he said, Roman emperors who established the first anti-polygamy laws in the 3rd century denounced the practice as unnatural and dangerous, placing it in the same category as, okay, other words that I'm not going to say. So in Rome, they believed something about why there is some kind of invested necessity for society to have monogamy. So what might that have been? Well, this is an article from Psychology Today. This is about 3 years old. And it references Jordan Peterson. And there's a blow up 3 years ago about him talking about, guys that are, whatever, they're not getting regular access to women. But this article describes a lot of things, but one thing that it describes, and I think is really important, is, and it gets to it here, in polygamous societies, historically, most common marriages through human history, wealthy and powerful men gather women to themselves in harems or in multiple wives. And we'll skip down to those 999 men who didn't get wives because Solomon had 1,000 wives, goes to theory, were more likely to act violently and socially disruptive. Now, this is the sentence I think that's really important. Not necessarily because they didn't get to have sex like the eyes, but because they didn't have any reason to support a stable, calm, peaceful society. Without a wife and children at home to care for and feed, young men had no reason to be invested in social stability. Now, I'm not saying that young people are going to start acting crazy. I think we're seeing kind of the opposite of that. I think you're just seeing young guys check out. Guys just don't want to be upwardly mobile, try and make more money, strive to be the best that they can be. And that's going to have an overall productivity drag on society, right? So if you recall the opening TikTok, the lady basically said that she didn't believe that traditional methods worked anymore. And the unfortunate thing about that is that we are basically 2 generations removed from our grandparents being married in 70 to 80% clip. And 2 generations later, we're hearing a young lady say that traditional relationships don't work anymore. And that reflects the overall trend. This is a Gallup poll, and it's showing that people that view polygamy as morally acceptable is growing. And polygamy, of course, means not just polyamory, which is just having the relationships, but polygamy is actually like binding these relationships in some sort of union that's recognized by the law. And as difficult it is to monitor marriages, I can't even imagine how difficult it's going to be for polyamorous relationships. But that being said, we're going to see a lot more relationships like This TikTok, the guy met last night, and this is his wife, right? As a matter of fact, we're probably already seeing these kind of relationships, and we're seeing like this embracing of polygamy, right? Where people are trying to find ways to be okay sharing people. But I think there's one part of this that can be 100% guaranteed. These feel-good relationships don't last because marriages don't last. If a marriage with two people can't last, I cannot see under any sort of logic how a marriage with more than two people is going to last longer and be more stable than what's not already stable at the moment. And so if you get an uptick in these kind of poly trends, I can only imagine what's going to come behind that. It's going to be an uptick probably in some strife and some very toxic things playing out. And we know how volatile things are in relationships already. But relationships like these I can't really see them not being volatile. So what comes? What's coming next? So why did I say let them share? Well, I think there are two reasons. One, we're powerless, and I believe that anything that you don't have control over, you shouldn't spend a lot of time worrying about. So whatever, if you want to go do that, fine. That's one reason. But the second reason is it's just not going to work on a great mass scale because we already see what's happening with normal marriages. So this is an article from Psychology Today, and it's called The Pros and Cons of Polygamy. And I'll skip down because it talks about the cons loaded down the article. And the first one is women in polygamous unions tend to marry at a younger age into a setup that by its very nature fosters jealousy, competition, and conflict, with instances of co-wives poisoning one another's offspring in a bid to further their own. So we already know that there are going to be dynamics at play in terms of jealousy, a hierarchy, and we know that most people aren't even functioning well in simple monogamous marriages. So if you add another element, that's just going to further complicate it. And of course, it's going to make it much more difficult for someone coming off a relationship like that to settle down with someone in a monogamous relationship, because how do you deprogram from this kind of relationship? Although husbands ought in principle to treat his wives co-wives equally, in practice he will most inevitably favor one over the others, most likely the youngest, most recent one. So there are going to be that dynamics at play in who's the slimmest one, who's the one who, is the youngest one or the most in shape one. And you have other issues at play. What if someone is pregnant? What if someone is sick? You have all of these dynamics that are going to shift. You cannot give equal attention to three different, it's impossible, right? So with these added difficulties, it's going to create not just difficulty inside the relationship, but it's also going to cause like psychological damage, so that the person that might leave the relationship, they're going to have to get undone. Wow, polygamy, okay. Divorce. So another problem, of course, is divorce requires that the bride price be returned, leaving many women with no choice but to remain in miserable or abusive marriages. So of course, that means, of course, what happens when 2 or 3 women are in a polygamous situation and, one of the women is quote unquote discarded or she's shunned, right? And let's say she doesn't do anything crazy. Let's just say that she just kind of gets pushed out the door. That woman, and if she does have children, that woman's going to need, at the very least, she's going to need help raising the children and maybe even possibly resources. And those resources are going to have to come from somewhere, right? Now, this is where I think is the most key part of this. Polygyny tends to disadvantage the offspring. On one hand, children in polygamous families share the dream pole with alpha male and stand to benefit from his protection and resources, influence, outlook, and expertise. But on the other hand, their mothers are younger, less educated, and they receive a divided share of the father's attention, which we're seeing with Nick Cannon, which may be directed at his latest wife or amasses resources for his next one. There are also greater risk of violence from their kin group, particularly the extended family. Overall, the infant mortality in polygynous families is considerably higher than monogamous families. So we're going to probably see a push for this kind of behavior in the future, right? You're going to start hearing people say, well, if I can't find one guy that I can work with, I'm going to consolidate on the type of guy that is what I want. The only problem with this is that how long term is this going to be viable? If a lot of the RP tenants are what they are, you're going to see more and more guys, you know, as they advance, they're going to, you don't just easily recycle people out of your lives, but some people are probably going to try and do something like that. And that ending is not going to be pretty. And then you have the children being grown up in different, in an environment where you have multiple people raising multiple children, and it's extended family. It's mixed families on steroids. And if people want to do this, that's fine. You feel free to do this, but I don't think that I want to be involved with anyone that has a past like this, because they're going to be carrying psychological issues that are going to take a lifetime to undo. And I just say, if this is what it's going to be, hey, I'm going to say, do your thing. I'm going to get my passport. I'm going to go look for someone who wants to build a traditional family. I'm going to do me, and I'm going to chug deuces. And for my fellow passport bros, hey, if you choose to do the same, I'm not going to blame you. All right, that's all, guys. I'll talk to you guys in the next video.